Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? And we are live. And this is our new channel, Unveiling Faith. And with me, as always, is Mahdin and Kali. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to run through the evil God hypothesis and look through a video by Thought Adventure Podcast. And they came up with some refutations against it, and we wanted to go through it and see whether their refutations hold any weight or not. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump straight into it, but with a little bit of a delay. We want to plug in our channel, and this is the new channel that you're looking at. This is English only channel, and what we're going to do is most of our live streams and clips, of course, are going to be in English on this channel, and they're going to be slightly more tilted towards philosophy, maybe a deeper philosophy on this channel. And then as you listen to it, we also have another channel at Philo Sapiens, which is our main channel, and you'll also find a lot of videos over there. And slowly, what we're going to do is we're going to bring clips and live streams from that channel to this channel. So as of now, we don't have a single person viewing us, but hoping later on that number builds up. And what I'm going to request you to do is like, subscribe, and share as much as you can, and especially in the United States and all the English-speaking countries, Australia, UK, and wherever you can, even South Africa, if you're from that part of the world. So before any further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the mic to just say, first of all, I'm going to say hi to Mahdin. Kali, how you guys? Yeah.
I'm good, Philo. How are you doing? How's everybody else? How is Kylie?
I'm all good
Doing
as
good.
well. Yeah,
All right. So
Okay.
Mahdin, what I'm going to
good,
do is
good to
I'm
be
going to
back.
hand. Yeah, good to be back. Sorry, Kelly, I cut you off. Go ahead, please.
No, I was just saying good to be back after a long time.
Yeah, it's been a long time, of course. Yeah, we need to keep doing regular streams. We need to be maybe. I think one time we decided we'll do 2 streams per week. I think we have gone, way off that course pretty much. But what I'm gonna do is to kick off this stream. I'm gonna hand over the mic to Mahdin, who's gonna explain the problem of evil, and then this evil god hypothesis, what it entails, what are the theodicies that theists have come against it, and all those things. So, Mahdin, mic is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Philo. So I'll be very, very brief because I think the heavy lifting is going to be all done in the actual main video when we analyze the discussion. So for this, let's just go over it very briefly. Everybody's heard the problem of evil, and lots of people have heard of the Stephen Law's version of the evil God hypothesis. So the general problem of evil, as everybody's heard of it, it's just the idea that when we have a God that is all powerful, all knowing, he's benevolent, he's all good, how can we reconcile that with all the suffering and aka evil in this world? And if there is suffering and there's evil, that seems to contradict or be against the concept of a all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing, benevolent God. So there's a disharmony or a massive conflict now. And what I would say this argument is like, it's like the argument of the following type of structure. If somebody says that you have a mother who bakes you a cake every week, she's an all loving baker. She bakes a cake every week, every Friday or something like that, and she's incessantly interested in doing such a thing. Well, if the weeks go by and there is no cake, there's nothing in the oven, you don't see this person, they don't talk, they don't communicate, there's not even an egg or a flour bag opened, there's no visual sign or anything of a cake being made anywhere, then most people would reasonably conclude, due to the absence of a cake, that this incessant cake loving lady who bakes a cake every week on a Friday doesn't exist, right? That's common sense. So if somebody said, I have a mother, who does this and that every week, and there's no sign of this, then most people would reasonably conclude through common sense and reason and evidence that the absence of evidence here of a cake is good evidence of the absence of this being. So the whole point here is that when it's reasonable to believe that we ought to expect, so emphasis on the term, where we ought to expect evidence and we don't see that evidence, in that circumstance, the absence of evidence is good evidence for the non-existence of that thing. And in this case, it's the mother, and apply the same structure of thinking to God. In the absence of evidence of this benevolent God, all-powerful, all-knowing God, who's all benevolent, then if we don't see that, then that's good evidence for that being lacking. In this case, because of the excuse me, the amount of suffering, the amount of unexplained suffering, right? Unnecessary suffering. Some people say gratuitous suffering. Yeah, can we go to the next slide? Yeah, so theists have come out with defenses, understandably, to this through centuries of debate and discussion, modern day philosophy, etc. Theologians have deployed a number of arguments. We call these theologies. So theologies are basically trying to reconcile the apparent absence of goodness, or you could say the apparent enormity of suffering, unexplained gratuitous suffering, as I said, that is seemingly inconsistent with this all-powerful God, all-loving God. Yeah, and atheists and people may say that the presence of suffering disqualifies the existence of a good, loving God. Well, theists have deployed these theologies to try and explain it away. So some of these defenses involve explanations to show that, in fact, it is not inconsistent with an all-powerful, all-loving, benevolent God. Yeah, in fact, not inconsistent. The suffering that we see can be consistent with this, and therefore, an atheist is wrong to look at the suffering and go, you know what, this suffering is evidence that there is no such God, or the lack of goodness in this world is evidence of there being no God of this nature, of this type, like the Christian God or the Islamic God, right? But the theists go, nope, you can't do that. In fact, the suffering is completely consistent with this type of God. And what do they say to make this argument? They say the free will defense, the greater good defense, and you can see there's 7 others. So everybody who's reading this, you can pause it and you can read through it. What Stephen Law does, he says that, wait a minute, all of these types of arguments we can deploy similarly to explain an evil God. So yeah, so here's Stephen Law's challenge. So Stephen Law says you can say the same thing if we just imagine the contraposition, the alternative proposition, this parallel. Imagine if there was an all-evil God. Imagine there's an all-powerful, all-evil God, hell-bent on causing suffering and so on. Well, most people would look at the world just like atheists look at the world. So atheists who believe in the problem of evil look at the world and go, you know what? There can't be an evil God, an all-evil God. There's too much beauty. There's too much non-suffering. There's too much pleasant things happening in the world. There's ice cream. There's babies being born. There's summer. Good seasons. There's a lot of happiness and joy. So the fact that the world is not full of total evil is good evidence that there isn't an evil God, right? Most people would say that. But just like theists can defend a good God, what Stephen Law says is that you can also defend an evil God and say that the data that we see from the world is also not necessarily inconsistent with an evil God, right? So the idea is what Stephen Law wants to ultimately conclude is that realistically, if there is a God, because of the fact that the world is not totally evil, and because of the fact that the world is not totally good, because there's lots of happiness and there's, it's a mixture, we can rule out the possibility that there is an all evil God, right? But and if theists accept this, which they do intuitively, they think the world is full of too much happiness for there to be an all evil God. Then, aha, the theist also must accept that the world is full of too much suffering for there to be an all good God, right? So we cannot conclude that there's an all good God, and we cannot conclude there's an all evil God, right? But for some reason, the theist wants to have his cake and eat it too. They want to say that no, we can actually conclude there's an all good God. But this is where Stephen Law's challenge becomes apparent. Why do theists have this double standard where they think they can have a good God but not an evil God? Well, theists, again, if you go back to the Theodicies, what they try to say is that these Theodicies would explain how an all good God can exist despite the data that we see in the world of gratuitous suffering. Because the gratuitous suffering might be for example, number 3, to build our souls. We need to suffer so that we can become heroic people, for example. Maybe our suffering will teach us a life lesson and we'll become better as a result. Or, if your sibling dies, for example, you will learn something constructive and then do something good in the world. This helps build your soul and character. Similarly, he says other stuff as well. For example, maybe, although there is all this gratuitous, unexplained suffering, maybe God has a mysterious plan that we cannot see right now, and we don't fully understand it with our limited intelligence. But one day we will become aware of that limited plan. And similarly, maybe that child who died from cancer, gratuitous suffering, no explanation. People prayed, there was no answer, the child died, everybody suffered. How does God allow that? Well, lots of theists say that there might be like a future redemption, number 7. Yeah, you see that number 7 there? Future redemption, meaning that maybe ultimately that suffering that the child has suffered, the cancer, will be rewarded or given some sort of compensation in heaven. That child will be given some sort of prize in the future, etc. So you can say all of these things and make it consistent with a good God, that a good God has made that child suffer for a future compensatory reason, right? But then Stephen Law says, why can't we churn out all of these same explanations for an evil God, right? Perhaps an evil God allows all this happiness, right? So let's look at the asymmetry here, the parallel. A child who's suffering from cancer will be paid some sort of compensation in the future. Well, let's look at the parallel version of that. A child who's really, really, really happy, who's having a great time. There's no suffering. How do we reconcile that with an evil God, an all evil God? Would an all evil God allow a child to just have a completely great and wonderful childhood? Right? Well, you can think of an evil theology. An evil theodicy.
Theodicy, right? Yeah.
Theodicy, yeah. Where that child who's enjoying his life at that time, maybe when he dies, he will be given a lot of suffering then. So see the parallel. So what it's doing here is creating a symmetrical situation where each of these explanations can be, through a little bit of shifting, through a little bit of amendment, be deployed in the context of an evil God, right? So instead of the cancer-induced child who suffered being compensated goodness, the happy child who never got cancer will be compensated, or not, well, compensation is not the right word, but will be given some sort of revenge in the afterlife. See that? So number 7, I'm
Yeah,
just gonna
or
go.
maybe you could say that he has only been given this good life so that he
Mm,
can, once he's in that terrible state, he can remember that time and that good time, and even feel worse that, I used to live in this, I used
exactly.
to be
Yeah.
happy, and now I'm in such a bad situation. Because it's understandable that a person who has been through good times and then ends up in a bad situation is feels worse than a person who has always been through a bad time, right? We understand that feeling. So maybe that is one way of torturing humans. Yeah, that an evil
Yes.
god
uh,
can think of.
inflicting worst kind of torture, basically what you want
Exactly,
to say,
exactly,
right? That's the
exactly.
worst kind of
Because
torture, that
for
you
example,
give them some good
exactly,
chocolates, or bounties, and then
exactly.
you let them
Then
suffer, and that
there you
becomes worst kind of
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So exactly. So we can come up with all these sort of rationales that theologians have come up for defending a good God, and we can use them in the same context. Oh, sorry, a similar context to defend a evil God. And like that number seven that we just discussed, it can apply to something like a mysterious plan. So we cannot fully understand a good God's purposes. Maybe a good God allowed evil so he can fulfill a higher plan that is ultimately leads to good in the future. Well, let's think about the parallel to that in the context of an evil god. Maybe an evil, all evil god, allows goodness in a calculated way for a higher purpose, a mysterious purpose that we cannot see right now, which in the future will eventually manifest and end with an overall evil, a higher divine evil plan.
higher evil, basically.
Yes, exactly. And you can do the
Mhm.
same thing for the soul building. For example, just like our souls need to be built so that we can develop virtuous and resilient souls, so that we can, the suffering, a good God allows suffering so that we can become better people. A bad God, an all evil God allows some goodness, right? So that we can become more notorious. Now, this one's a bit more trickier, right? You may think, well, how is that parallel, working? How, soul building, I mean, suffering might turn us into heroes, and so on. Well, goodness, etc. That can also work to turn us into evil, right? A lot of goodness and so on. You may think upon it, you may contemplate it, you may, for example, become hedonistic, etc. So this one's a bit
Exactly.
more,
Yes.
yeah. This one's a bit more tricky. Sorry, go on.
Okay. I was saying that even in Islamic theology,
Mm,
and even in Quran, it says that Allah even tests people by
mm,
giving them things, right? Blessing them, let's say, through wealth, through children, through their health. So even what you consider blessings, or what you're considering as good things, might empower a person to become more evil, to be able to do bad deeds, to,
mm,
as Mahadan mentioned, to be more hedonistic, to become more materialistic, right? So he can become
mm.
all these evil things, apparently, what you would commonly categorize as evil, by through the blessings and good life that a person can have. So again, so this is how maybe an evil god might create evil by
Mm.
blessing someone, by apparently blessing or giving good things to
Yeah.
someone.
And it doesn't have to. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a complete parallel. For example, it could
Exactly.
just like, yeah. I mean, in terms of soul building, what it could do is that by giving you lots of goodness, it makes the suffering more
Even
sharp
worse.
and
Yeah.
worse. Yeah. So if God gives you lots of good things, an evil God gives you good things, then when you contrast it when to the suffering that you might eventually face, then it makes the suffering worse, right? So there could be lots of ad hoc explanations given like that, and this is not unseen from theologians. Theologians give arguments like this. So although it doesn't have to be a complete parallel, the point is we can think of post hoc rationalizations like that. But the reason an evil god is allowing like ice cream and stuff and all this other stuff is that when we see the alternative, we feel a visceral sense of terror when we get to it. So we give you prosperity so that when we take prosperity away, you feel suffering. It feels more tragic. It feels more horrendous. So there can be lots of explanations like that why there's goodness, and that kind of builds your sort of instead of a resilient and virtuous soul, it might build a more sinister soul where you feel more depraved, right? So instead of building virtue, it builds enmity, right? Hatred or horror and terror. So it can still build your character like that. So an evil god can be reconciled with a soul building theodicy as well, just for the evil purposes. And similarly, greater good. Maybe a good God is trying to bring about a utilitarian good overall. The child suffered, like the Jews were gassed and killed so that the United Nations can be built, and eventually we learn about human rights, and then we try to stop all future wars. So it led to a greater good. The Jews had to suffer so that it can led to some collective human togetherness, so that we form universal human rights, something like that. Any sort of explanation like that. That's like a greater good theodicy, which is number two. Well, we can think of a greater evil theodicy, very in a similar vein. You know, the reason God allows some happiness and flourishing of human beings is for eventually to lead to a greater demise, right? So that it can bring about a greater evil. Again, very similar to the soul building theodicy. If a society is well put together and is strongly put together, and then it eventually collapses, well, it can lead to a greater evil. So sometimes an evil God may build people up, build societies up, allow lots of flourishing, and then break it down and so on, and it leads to an overall evil or something like that. So you can come up with that a counter explanation as well for the evil God, for the greater good. In this sense, it's a greater evil. And finally, the free will defense. Alvin Plantinga has said the reason that God allows human agents to have to do evil, which is like go and kill somebody, is because without free will, there won't be any good, right? Because if there's a gun to your head and then you give charity, or you decide not to do evil, etc., you decide not to steal. If we were puppets, if we were controlled by this robot inside of us or something, and we had no free will, then our moral actions will be meaningless. They'll be just predetermined, right? So in order to have more human good, where moral agents do good, they have to have the ability to choose to do evil, right? So God gave us free will so that we can choose to do evil, right? By doing such a thing, then God allows us to go and give charity, do good things, etc., instead of stealing, killing, murdering, raping. But the inevitable problem with this is that God, therefore, sometimes, because of this, as God has allowed humans to sometimes commit crimes, right? It's an inevitable byproduct. He doesn't want it to happen, but it's an inevitable byproduct to have actual moral good. To actually have moral good, therefore, we must have free will. But a byproduct of that is that ultimately humans are going to steal. So that's the explanation behind why God allows humans to kill, rape, steal. Is because without the free will to do that, we're not going to have genuine love and actual moral choices to do good. The problem is, again, you can do the same thing for an evil God. An evil God also did that. An evil also gave us free will, because think about it. If an evil God made Jeffrey Dahmer and programmed him to kill, is Jeffrey Dahmer genuinely evil? Well, no, he's just been programmed to kill. So etc. So therefore, the evil God has to give free will so that sometimes humans will exercise that free will to do good. Something that the evil God doesn't like, doesn't really want it to happen. The evil God wants Jeffrey Dahmer to kill, but he wants, when Jeffrey Dahmer goes and kills, he wants Jeffrey Dahmer to kill out of his own free will. That's why evil God gave free will, and this is why sometimes human actors exercise that free will and do good things. So, as you can see, the structure of the argument shows that you can come up with all these rationalizations to similarly support an evil God. What's this point? Stephen Law is trying to say that theists deploy all these arguments to try and make it consistent with a good and loving God, that the world data, suffering, horrendous suffering, gratuitous suffering, does not defeat the existence of a good God. And theists seem to think that an evil God doesn't have these explanations. Well, no. Stephen Law says you can make the same case for an evil God, and you can also therefore sustain the reality of an evil God. But if theists are willing to say that none of these explanations, the free will defense, the greater good defense, the soul building theodicy, mysterious God plan, spiritual welfare, limited human understanding, future redemption, none of these work effectively for the evil God, then they should also concede that they don't work effectively for a good God. But if they wish to say that it works effectively for a good God, then they must bite the bullet and say that it works effectively for an evil God. In which case, they're stuck. We can no longer distinguish between whether a good God exists or an evil God exists. And that, right? The challenge to the theist is to show why these explanations, or some extra explanations that they can think of, tilt in favor of a good God and not an evil God. And they can distinguish between a good God and an evil God, and dismiss the existence of an evil God, and posit and strongly defend the existence of a good God. And I submit that I've not heard any argument to really delineate between the two. And in fact, Stephen Law's challenge remains unanswered in a sophisticated sense. Anyway, yeah, that's the point. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Very well put, Mahdin. Yes. One more thing in favor of, I think probably you already covered it, but just for the sake of saying it, I'll say an evil God would probably want the free will as well as a greater good, and that's why he would put, you know, goodness is in human beings. Because if all he did was all there was just evil, then the society would just collapse. And
Mm,
the greater good for an evil god is to have that kind of sustained evil prolonged
mm,
to as much longer as it can. And
mm,
that's why he would have the free will as well as, kind of, yeah, the greater good that
mm.
he has in mind.
Exactly.
Anyway,
and
so
and
what?
and of course,
Yes.
one thing that I'd like to point out over here is, we don't have to parody every theodicy that a theist would present, right? We don't have to exactly have a parody for each of the theodicies. But because even if we ignore some of the theodicies, we'll say, well, we don't have a parallel for that, but that wouldn't actually address the challenge. It would not automatically create an asymmetry just because we don't have a specific kind of theodicy in our on or one of the theodicies on our side. Wouldn't just prove or disprove or refute the challenge. I would say
Yeah,
it
it
I
won't
would argue.
undermine the challenge. Yes,
Exactly.
that's
It
true.
won't
Exactly.
undermine. You have to
Exactly.
actually posit as to why an evil god is impossible.
Yeah,
That
I
is what
think
will that that that,
as
that
long
is
as you
what will
posit
actually.
that probability,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly,
it's yeah.
exactly.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Like Kylie said, let's say the soul building theodicy is more fitting with a good God than it is with an evil God, right? You're right. We don't have to exactly parody it, because maybe it is the case that an evil God won't want to build souls in any particular way.
Exactly,
It
exactly,
doesn't matter.
exactly.
The evil God might have other theodicies cannot be
Yes,
mirrored by a good God, right? As
exactly.
well.
Yes,
So we can think of this, so it doesn't have to parody every single one. The real essence of Stephen Law's case rests on, and I think Kyle is right, is that why do we have any good reason to believe in a good God over an evil God, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
If we have some good reasons to believe that given all these evils, despite that there are the we can come up with some reason to explain those away and still believe in a god who is all good and maximally good, then equally a person can come up with with his own reasons to believe that all the good in this, despite all the good in this world, there we can have good reasons to believe that the god is evil. That is the entire gist of the argument that Stephen Law is
Mm,
giving. So I
mm.
think that's why we don't have to address each and every theodicy or to present a parody for each of the theodicies. No, that is not required from us. But actually, the cases that we can, in many cases, provide a parody of most of these
Yes.
theodicies.
I
So
think
that is why we were going through these.
at any point, if we can provide a theodicy for an evil god, I think
Right.
the
That
argument
should be enough.
succeeds. That's
Yeah,
Yeah.
the
that
argument
should be enough.
succeeds pretty much. Yeah,
Even a
And the
single
last
theodicy should be enough.
yeah,
Yeah, and the last thing I'd say is that all the deficiencies of the theistic theodicies can be also mirrored by the
Exactly.
evil theodicy. So somebody may say there's a deficiency in the greater good. So, like the Holocaust happened, the Jews died for greater good. And somebody, like an atheist, may say, did that really happen for a greater good? And theists say don't feel pressured to justify it empirically, right? They just say greater good. But did they actually work it out and show that, in fact, that suffering, the Holocaust suffering, happened for a genuine greater good? Did it actually improve the world, the Holocaust? Or did lots of people die unnecessarily and nobody's soul was billed, no greater good happened, no sort of future redemption can be seen? That's what atheists say, to dismiss the theodicy. So in fact, that is what I would say as well, right? When a theist defends a good God by saying the evil and suffering is necessary for a greater good, we can show, in fact, the greater good is not happening. It's not leading to moral growth. It's not leading to character development or something else, some sort of utilitarian, consequentialist argument, something utilistically improved in the future. There's no future improvement, right? And that's enough evidence to show that, in fact, there is no good God, right? That's how it ends for the atheist who makes the objection to these theodicies. The theodicy is not good enough. But if the theist still maintains the theodicy, despite that deficiency that I've just raised, and ignores the fact that that's what I've said is good reason to think that the theodicy is unjustified and therefore a good God doesn't exist, then you should also mirror that deficiency in a evil God theodicy as well. For example, if I say that all this happiness happened for a greater evil, the theist will obviously be using common sense, just like the atheist did. Go, wait a minute, all this happiness did not lead to an evil. This society didn't build up all this happiness, roller coasters, sunshine, peaceful organizations and institution, a great police force, eventually to lead to an evil. Where's that evil that you're talking about? Right? That's what they would say. But we can then say, but that's exactly what you do when you deploy your greater good theodicy. This is why I can still consistently deploy the greater evil theodicy. I don't need to empirically justify it, right? So all the deficiencies can be shared as well. And if the theist wants to hold on to the deficient theodicy for a good God, then guess what? The atheist can also, and you don't have to be an atheist for this, but the other person can also hold on to a deficient greater evil theodicy or any other theodicy. Okay?
Right,
Yeah.
Mahdin, yes.
Right.
Definitely.
I
Shall we
think,
then
yeah, I
jump
think
on
we
to
can
the
now,
shall we now jump
let's
on
jump
to
onto
the
the video.
video, right? All right. Okay, I forgot to add that. I think I had, but then it somehow got removed probably. Can you guys see the screen? All right,
Yes.
this is at about 20 minutes 26 seconds, right? And I think maybe the audience knows who the panelists in this discussion are, but let's jump into their arguments pretty much straight away.
Formulations of it, but that's the kind of basic. If we had to boil it down, I think for people who probably may have lost in constructing the argument, think of it as an argument.
Can you up the volume a bit?
You say.
Is that maximum?
Callie, can you not hear? That's the maximum I have.
Okay, fine.
Can you hear it or not hear it properly?
I can hear it, I thought, but the volume was not very
Let me
at
try.
the optimal level. Yeah, where it should be.
Let me try to see if I can. No, I don't think so. I can increase that.
Okay, play it. Mahdin, can you hear him? Do you think it's fine, the volume?
I can hear it, yes.
Okay, fine. Then just play it.
Right.
From this, you say from the existence of evil, the existence of evil doesn't disprove God. Well, they're going to construct a parody and say, well, the existence of good doesn't disprove.
Can you restart it? Just take it back 20 seconds
to a compatible.
So that you
good
can,
for that's the kind of just really.
Do you still have a few more things to say with regards to?
That's the kind of basic way I can just read it off the top of my head. I'm sure we can get nuanced formulations of it, but that's the kind of basic. If we had to boil it down, I think for people who probably may have feel lost in constructing the argument, think of it as an argument from parody. Okay. You say from the existence of evil, the existence of evil doesn't disprove God. Well, they're going to construct a parody and say, well, the existence of good doesn't disprove the existence of an evil God. The two are compatible. And when you come to explain evil and compatibility between evil and God through theodicies, those same theodicies, the free will theodicy, the soul, the character building theodicy, and the greater good theodicies, these can be flipped to show why they'll be equally applied to an evil God and good.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. So we'll try and bring Brother Abdul Rahman in here now as well. So have you got any sort of comments with regards to what's been said so far? Like for example, what sort of responses would you maybe levy against someone bringing forth this particular argument?
Yeah, assalamu alaikum. As Dr. Saf put it, I mean, it's really about creating an asymmetry, right? In the parity arguments that are provided. For example, the parity theodicies that Dr. Saf mentioned. And I really don't think that's difficult to do. In terms of the theodicies, it might be more tricky because it really depends on, like in terms of the theistic theodicies, for example, the free will defense or the free will theodicy, that in the theistic context, that might just be presented as an alternative possibility to get out of the logical problem of evil.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I mean, you could even grant to the evil being proponent that well, you could use a similar maneuver to just as a logical possibility to get out of a logical argument. But I think it's more done in the context of a positive defense of a good God using theodicies. So like, for example, pointing out an asymmetry in the free will defense is not that difficult because, well, we know from our experience that freely choosing good is not the same as freely choosing evil, for example. I mean, we know that we tend towards, or we incline towards evil and selfishness more naturally than we just incline towards certain kinds of good. So there's more of a challenge there. Just pointing out any difference, I think, creates
that's right. We need to point out a difference, but what they'll press is to point out a significant difference. I mean, the other symmetry, the other dimension, symmetry dimensional aspect of symmetry is that the evil being challenge or the evil God challenge put by theists proponents, whether they're called anti-theists, maltheists, whatever you want to call them, atheists, they will also want to say that the concept of an evil being and a concept of a good being are equivalent. Not only that, not only that, they would want to say that any arguments you bring for the existence of God, ontological, cosmological, teleological, whatever it might be, are equally apt to demonstrate the existence of an evil being, because natural theology doesn't point to the moral character of God; it just points to certain attributes.
We're going to clearly disagree, right? Because
of course.
So I think in terms of pointing out asymmetries in the theodicies, maybe they're a bit like weak or not as clear when you're talking about the cumulative case, right, which is natural theology, and how clearly I think that they're not on equal ground. For example, you've got the moral argument for the existence of God, and I think that one throws a wrench in this narrative that there is a symmetry, because I mean, we can talk about the moral argument, but I think it does point to God being the grounds of objective moral good, and I don't think you can parody it in terms of evil. But then also I mean, I think maybe you can talk about this later. But then even as far as cosmological arguments are concerned, and contingency arguments and stuff, God's independence, I think there's something from the
So he just Abdur Rahman. This guy's name is Abdur Rahman, and he just posed a sort of a refutation, according to him, that the moral argument for God actually refutes this challenge, because a similar you're saying that it cannot be replicated for an evil God. I don't see why not, because at the very essence of a moral, when you prove, I can understand how he understands the moral argument for God, how he thinks that actually in a way proves that only good God is possible and not an evil God. But I think we can
Yeah,
totally deconstruct it. That the moral argument for God is very weak. It's not a good argument at all. It's a very circular argument. So I would say that he has not refuted it at all. Moral
I
argument
think
is a
why
good argument
can't
for
it
God,
be
doesn't do
mirrored the
anything.
same way? Why can't it be
Exactly, it
mirrored
can
the
be.
same way
I would
the
say it can be
yeah
mirrored. It can be mirrored, because then you would ask, what is moral? You could
yeah
argue then for that God it is moral to he considers it moral to
to rape and
commit
all those
all
things?
sort of,
Sorry,
yeah,
I
all
shouldn't
of,
use those words. Yeah, right.
exactly. That is one of the only words that we should not be using
Yeah,
for the
sorry,
sake of
sorry about to you.
staying
Yeah,
monetized. So so
yeah,
so all
yeah.
these, so for all these seemingly atrocious things that we humans consider evil, for that God maybe he thinks that, well, those are the moral good for him. He would
Right.
consider them good
Yeah,
by that
exactly.
definition. So
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't see how or he thinks that the moral argument for God actually somehow refutes or addresses this challenge at all.
Exactly. Yeah, I think so too. Mahdin.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the moral argument is the idea that the objective moral duties and obligations exist, or something like that, and morality exists. If morality exists, it must exist on God, and therefore God exists on something like that, right? That might not be the exact formulation, right? So it's the idea that objective moral goods exist, right? And if more objective moral goods exist, and they're trying to say that objective evils don't exist, or something like that. I think that's if I had to steelman his argument, it's something like that, right? So he's not trying to say that. Yeah, he's not saying that evil can exist in terms of a binding obligation to do evil. He's trying to say that there are objective moral duties and obligations. That's what the moral argument kind of rests upon. And if there is objective moral duties and obligations, the best explanation for it or something is that it comes from a God, etc. You don't have a single case for evil, right? And henceforth, by doing such a thing, they try to prove the existence of God. God must exist because morals exist, right? And if God exists, then based on that argument, it'll be a moral God. They're not trying to prove that there is a moral God per se. They're trying to prove there is that sort of God. But you can say that incidentally, they also prove that there's a moral God, right? So I think that's the thing. But you can make that same parallel. Yeah, you can obviously make that parallel. But first of all, I think natural. That's not a natural theology argument. So what the guy in the blue said was that from natural theology that you can't decide, you can't deduce.
The guy in the blue is Chaudhry. You can call him Chaudhry.
Okay, so I'm just going to call him guy in the blue for now. Yeah, Chaudhry, did you say?
Saf Chaudhry. Saf Chaudhry.
Okay, so basically, I'm just going to call him the guy in the blue. It's just easier for me. What did you say? Chaudhry, Saf Chaudhry. Oh.
Saf
Yes,
Chaudhry.
Saf
Saf
Chaudhry.
Chaudhry.
Chaudhry,
Yeah.
no, do you know what's a Chaudhry?
Yeah, I know what a Chaudhry is. I'm just making sure that I heard you right. Right?
Yeah,
Right.
Before I called him Chaudhry. But okay, Chaudhry. I've not heard Chaudhry in a while. I've not heard
Chaudhry
the way Mahdin is saying, I never thought that this could sound that dirty.
I never thought his name would be Chaudhry. But okay, Chaudhry.
All right.
Chaudhry. What Chaudhry is?
Let's call him Sam, or guy in the blue. I think you should continue calling him guy in the blue then.
Like guy in the blue. Or
No,
you can
it's
call
just-
him Saf. You
Yeah.
can call him Saf.
Yeah. So safe guy, the black guy in the blue, Chaudhry, he says that all the natural theology arguments, and that's right. Stephen Law says that from all the arguments from natural theology, which is argument from nature, you can't deduce a good God or an evil God. Is the nature of a being that you deduce is ambivalent. Now, does a moral argument fall under natural theology? I don't know. That really depends on what you think of morals. If I was to be charitable, I would say, okay, fine, right? It could be in the nature of the world universe. There are morals. In that sense, maybe okay. So the guy in the black, I don't know what his name is, Abdul Rahman. If I got that right.
Yes, Abdul Rahman.
Yeah, so I think I'd give that to him, that he'll be correct to say that actually that would be an exception, that actually, no, you can deduce that there is a good God because there's morals, right? But he kind of neglects the fact, and maybe this is because he thinks that it's easier to notice objective moral duties rather than objective immoral duties, let's say, right? That's probably why. But you could still make a case that just the way you make a case for objective morals, you can make a case for objective evil duties or something like that. In principle, you can.
Objective
However,
immorals.
Maybe something like that. In other words, if in the universe, So it depends on what type of what your outlook of the nature of morals are. If in the universe you are a type of person who thinks who doesn't really detect objective moral duties, etc., you may be more persuaded to
Yeah,
think that you may be more persuaded to think than
maybe someone like a psychopath,
yeah, exactly,
someone who
that
lacks empathy, someone who lacks
exactly,
empathy, someone who lacks
yeah,
any
yeah,
sort of compassion. And there are human
Compassion,
beings that we do
empathy, and
know
all
that
those things.
who
yeah,
lack
Yeah.
such some such feelings where they feel compassion towards other humans, and for them it doesn't matter. And in fact,
yeah,
many of them feel compelled to commit some sort of horrible acts upon other humans. They feel joy out of it.
yeah.
So I think for them, yeah, for those who lack the moral compass, if you want to call that a moral compass, that we humans
Mm.
feel that we have in us, or in most of us, I think. So for them, then this argument would not make sense, because they don't have any sense of such duties. But if I can interject, I would also argue that why I don't think that this argument, because the moral argument from God, I think itself is a very circular argument. And why I say that is that, and particularly why it won't help him in this, in addressing the argument or the challenge, the evil God challenge, is because I think when he's trying to deal with it, one could simply argue, or one could simply point out that how do you define morality? For a theist, I think most theists, if particularly the theists who believe in the divine command theory, if they believe in the divine command theory, then anything that God considers good or considers moral should be considered moral. Now,
Mm.
for an evil God, he might consider all the evil acts moral. Now, I'm using the word evil just to categorize all of the acts which we consider, as we humans consider as evil, or atrocious, right,
Bad, bad.
or
Yeah.
cruel, right? Yeah, bad.
Correct.
So maybe such a God would declare, or would consider all the cruel acts as moral.
Mm.
And in
Yeah.
that case,
Martin,
for
Martin,
example,
can you mute for a second?
yeah,
Yeah, I think there's a noise from your side. Yeah.
yeah. So, for example, unaliving a child, right? Um, that could be considered, that God might consider that um, morally acceptable and morally good. So, in that case, then you could simply argue that yes, that such a God would consider it. Now, if you want to appeal to the moral intuitions that we have, Mahdin, I think Mahdin already mentioned that that would only apply to humans who feel that duty, and then they consider that since we feel a sense of duty, or of compassion and justice towards other human beings, that's why this should be true, and therefore there is no other way to ground these duties except in a good God. Then that's why we should believe in a good God and in moral duties as well. Then I think, I think I raised a problem with that sort of thinking, or argument, in an Urdu stream, is that maybe this sense of justice and compassion has been kept in us by an evil God. Why? So that even those who are leading a generally happy life, who themselves are not going through that pain, by looking at the injustice that is there in the world, they could feel guilty, and then the pain of others, and therefore feel bad. So that, in a way, could, in a very sadistic God, would keep this sense of goodness in us, what we consider good, or a sense of compassion and justice in us, so that by the existence of injustice, by us witnessing the injustice in this world, we could feel bad, and we could feel that uneasiness and guilt in us, uh, and that makes God, you know that is how God makes us
That
feel
is the
bad.
sadistic God that
Exactly,
feels pleasure
exactly,
about, basically.
exactly. And
Yeah.
God feel pleasure or not, but I mean, he wants to
I
make
mean,
us
he's
suffer.
that's his
Yeah,
intention,
so that's
basically.
how,
Yeah.
we suffer, and that's how he wants us to suffer. I would give an example. If people have not seen, the a very I think it's a very good TV show, The Good Place. How the very how in that world, in that TV show, it is shown. Now I'm probably going to spoil it for some reason. So people who want to see the this show, I think probably should not listen to what I'm just going to tell you. But in that show, it's a very good show, I would say, because what it shows is that there are few people who believe that they're in heaven, but they feel like they don't deserve heaven because they were not good people in the world. So they realize, or they somehow realize that actually they are here by mistake, and they feel guilty for that. And actually it turns out that that was the place they were in was actually hell, and this guilt that they were feeling was the suffering that this hell was actually causing them. So that was the purpose of that hell. So that is exactly how an evil god could actually make us suffer, by making us moral beings and making us suffer for all the injustice and evil that we witness in this world. I think that is one way that we could easily explain away the moral argument.
Right, right. And the suffering, as you mentioned, I'm just gonna, double it down, kind of. That suffering doesn't have to be a physical suffering, but it
Exactly,
could be
can
a
be
mental
psychological.
torture, in a sense
Yeah,
that you feel
mental
that
guilt that we
suffering.
have. Yes,
Yeah, the guilt is it's in itself is a mental torture that's
exactly.
been uh,
Yeah.
suffering.
So let me just say something about what Kylie's explanation. The thing is, the whole point is to find parodies in terms of the arguments, right? So um, the Kylie's explanation is more of a refutation of the moral argument. So the moral argument doesn't go through because maybe there's an arbitrary God, in which case the moral argument fails,
Exactly, yeah.
right? So in other words, so the evil God hypothesis, the challenge is that every single parity that you can come up with, you can think of a symmetrical parity, and if you can point out an asymmetry, then that will shift towards the theist position. In other words, the fine-tuning argument, if it goes through, it doesn't prove an all good God. The fine-tuning argument is compatible with an all evil God because it doesn't tell you about the moral nature. The cosmological argument, the same. It doesn't prove that there's an all good first cause, uncaused cause, beginningless cause. That the nature is ambivalent and therefore is compatible with an evil God. The thing about this Abdul Rahman's argument is that if the moral argument goes through, it does prove a moral being if the premises are correct, and in which case he's right
Okay,
to say. Can you see what I'm saying? He's right to say that there's an
but you're
asymmetry.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
You're saying if it does, if it
Yes.
yeah.
does, then okay,
So
okay,
what
fine.
I would have to
But
say to him that he's correct. He's
yeah,
actually correct to point out that there's an asymmetry. What you guys have to do here is rather, in order to prove him wrong, is have to say actually the argument doesn't go through, which is beyond his point, right? He's trying to show actually this argument, responding to the guy in the blue, Chaudhary. This he's trying to say this argument, if it goes through, then it does show that there's a moral being, and he'll be right in that sense. But in order to counteract that, you have to say that it doesn't go through. So Stephen Law's challenge does fall a little bit weak there, in the sense that you can't think of a similar parody, or maybe you can. This is why I was trying to build up a parody, in the sense that maybe you can think that there are somebody who's more persuaded to think that you can make build a similar parallel argument for objective objective evil duties. But that's possibly he's trying to say that's harder to build, right? Given that he's trying to say that naturally it's clearer or something like that, and that will really rest upon the audience member. Does the audience member see this case for a objective moral duties to be stronger than the case for objective evil duties, right? But whatever the case, if you do refute the argument, then yeah, it doesn't. It will prove. If there's an arbitrary God, because if they eventually goes to the point of saying that divine command theory rests on the nature of God, and nature of God is just whatever He wills. If it gets to that point, you can actually prove that the moral argument doesn't actually prove more objective morals. It proves an arbitrary being who just makes things up, right? In which case the moral argument fails. I think in that situation, that's all you can say. But what I would say is that just one more minute. Just what I would say, these parodies don't have to be what we said at the beginning. Parodies don't have to be mirrored like for like, right? My point is, one parody can tackle all other parties sometimes, right? So let's say the mysterious God argument, right? What is the mysterious God argument? So theists say, for example, all this evil can be explained through a mystery that ultimately makes sense with a benevolent God. Maybe a greater good, something that we can't see, maybe some compensation in the future, or something that we just don't understand. Our intelligence is limited. That one argument can mirror and parallel all other parties, including the moral argument, even if the moral argument is true. So now we have
Right. I agree.
because it could very well be that we have no, because of a finite imagination, it seems as though there are objective morals, and therefore God exists with a moral character, benevolence or whatever, and he gives forth objective moral binding duties. But if theists accept skeptical theism, which is the mysterious God argument, then we can also deploy that in the context of a evil God. And that single party alone can also work to say that it may look like the case that there are objective moral duties, but there might be mysterious reasons that an evil God created for us to believe that, right? For a greater evil. And that one party can be used whenever these guys are pointing towards an asymmetry. We have to give it to them, though, when they do point through an asymmetry, they have a soft victory, a soft one. But given the strength of all the arguments together, and taking into account that this one party that I've just showed, the mysterious God objection, they don't land a hard victory, which is that one party can be used to still explain things, be still fitting with an evil God, and therefore they can't distinguish still between an evil God or a good God, right? That's all we have to say, really.
All right. Mahdin, I'm just thinking of about this thing, the asymmetry in moral argument that you just mentioned. Why we think that they have a soft victory? Mahdin, I'm getting a feedback from your side. So why we think that we have this soft, they have a soft victory on this, is because we think that there is some kind of objective morals exist, and at least they can claim that, and there's no asymmetric kind of an argument from our side, basically. But that's because probably people like us are thinking, what about, and this is just probably, I might be wrong in this parallel, what if Jack the Ripper and all these guys, Zodiacs and all, they were having those kind of conversations, and then for them, an objective evil kind of values exist,
That's why.
basically.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned that as well. It depends how far you believe that there is.
Right. They might be
But
in low in numbers, but they then still that argument, they can
yeah,
raise that argument, right?
yeah. But the trickiness of this is that by doing such a thing, we're just discounting one of the premises of the moral argument. In which case, it's not assuming that the argument goes through. So what I'm saying, a soft victory in the sense that it's a victory for Abdul Rahman versus the blue guy, because the blue guy is saying that despite all the natural theology arguments going through, the nature of God is ambivalent. Abdul Rahman is correct to say that this particular argument establishes the nature of God, right? And to say, if we assuming that they all go through, we can still be no, because if we assume that it all goes through, then it will be a good God. Assuming it goes through, if the moral argument is true, then it is a good God. So ultimately, the only way to do that is to not assume it goes through. In fact, to dispute one of the premises, and arguably, maybe by what you're saying, that psychopaths, sociopaths exist, we are disputing one of the premises, which is that there are objective, morally binding duties. In which case, we're assuming that the arguments are not going through, which is not his point. His point is if we assume it goes through, So it's a tricky thing.
Right.
So
Because
it's a soft.
Because I think even what Stephen Law's point is that even he's assuming that. Sorry, I'm getting a feedback. So according to him, he when he's making this argument, he's sort of granting them the existence of God in a way, right? So he's ignoring all the critique on all the arguments for the existence of God, and then he's just pointing out that even how Saf explained it is that all these arguments for God don't define the character of God, but the moral argument of God could, uh, theoretically speaking, it could prove it if it turns out to be correct. But actually, we are disputing that fact. So in this particular argument, I think we'll have to deal it separately, but because we don't think this argument actually goes through, and therefore, we'll have to deal it separately for the purpose of this challenge. But the challenge still stays strong because of the fact that we'll say that, okay, that argument is not valid, because even when we go through it, I think we'll discuss and we point out that you would end up with an arbitrary God, so it wouldn't help them.
Yeah,
My
yeah,
argument would be, the argument would not help your case, because all you would end up with is an arbitrary God, nothing more.
yeah. The only way to challenge Abdul Rahman's idea that if it goes through, then it does establish a good God. It's not ambivalent God. His character is known. The only way to challenge that is to say that to tweak Stephen Law's arguments a little bit, and this is completely applicable, open to him. He doesn't dispute this, Stephen Law. Is to say what I said at the last point that I said, is that the parodies don't have to be compared like for like, right? And that way we can do that. So in this case, if the mysterious God parody exists for the evil God, then that one parody can tackle every other parody. And this way we can still say Abdul Rahman's, even if it goes through, it doesn't establish a
Good
good
God.
God.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's how we can get the guy in the blue, Chowdhury, to win. Yeah,
Right.
to say actually, oh, if we accept skeptical theism, but in this case skeptical evil theism, right? Then the fact that the premises of the moral argument, even if it goes through, is still the case that it could be consistent with an evil God, and therefore, something like that. That's the closest I think we can get to it.
Okay.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So yeah, let's move on.
Yeah, all right. Yeah.
The evil God argument that would basically result in some kind of dependence, this evil being's dependence on creation in order to basically manifest any kind of evil. And this is related, of course, to the privation theory of evil. But yeah, so I think as far as like the cumulative case is concerned, it's just much easier to point asymmetries because of things like God's independence and obviously considering the nature of evil, and also the moral argument is a very strong one as well. And I don't know. I think you're. I saw in your notes you're going to talk about the epistemic concern as well, because I think the evil God argument does
Pause it.
leave you with some kind of possible radical skepticism. That how do we know?
Yeah. So did you guys hear what he said? He said that in a way, what he's trying to say is that the contingency argument, because he starts with that. He says that God cannot be evil because in order to be evil, he'll need to depend on his creation to manifest his evil, and therefore he would become dependent, and therefore a dependent entity cannot be the necessary existence and cannot be God. A God cannot be dependent. So I think it's easily refutable. That is, there's an if I don't understand why he don't see that, and even Jake would point that out later on in the video, that this is something. This is a critique that you could apply to a good God as well. A good God would depend on his creation to manifest his goodness. Now, why Abdurrahman thinks that that is not the case? Because he believes in the privation theory, and according to the privation theory, good is the natural state of things. So even neutral things which we consider neither good nor bad, he would
Uh,
categorize them as good.
Kali, can I
And
pause you for a
yes,
second?
sure.
I think there's some rustling sound coming off from your mic. Can you do you hear it, Mahdin, as well? Just
Yeah,
wanting to have a
yeah,
better audio. Yeah,
I,
just wanting to have a better audio.
I can hear it as
Because
well.
yeah. So can you find a better
Okay, is it
place, or
better?
maybe
Is it
yeah,
is it better
yeah,
now?
better.
Okay.
Sorry,
So what
sorry
I'm
to have
saying is,
interrupted you.
no, thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so what I'm saying is that why Abdurrahman is, or why Abdurrahman thinks that this argument works, is because he thinks that he believes in the privation theory, and he believes that the evil is nothing but the absence of good, and therefore even neutral things are categorized as good according to his dictionary. But that is not something that everyone needs to believe in. For a proponent of an evil god, he could claim that for him everything, evil is a natural state of things, even neutral things are evil, and therefore good is the absence of evil, and that is the kind of privation theory that he believes in. There is no proof that he can, that Abdur Rahman can provide to prove his theory, or prove his privation theory, right?
Yeah.
To categorize neutral as good,
Exactly.
there
I
is no
think
reason
it's
to
the
believe that.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
I think,
absolutely agree. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. That's true.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, it doesn't see, I don't. He doesn't give any justification why evil is a privation from good, and any more than good is a privation from evil.
From evil. Right.
We see good acts in the world, and we see evil acts. There's suffering in the world, and there's non-suffering. Why is one a deprivation of the other? And he doesn't give a real asymmetry. Why is it? Is because one is more in quantity? That's not clear. I think is it's hard to quantify whether suffering exists more or pleasure exists more. I mean, it's hard to quantify, and I don't think anybody's make a sound empirical case. Some people may say, like the philosopher Schopenhauer, that suffering is the most default state of humanity, in the sense that we're always suffering. We're thirsty, we're hungry, minor sufferings. That the mere human condition is such that we are built to feel a little bit of anxiety or dissatisfaction with our condition. That's why we're always moving from one place to another. And if we look around the animal kingdom, there's a lot of suffering and a lot of tragedy, and it's not clear that quantifiably there's more good than so. So it's not a quantifiable thing. Then what is it? Why is one the what? Yeah. So I don't know how he makes that case. So he doesn't give any justification for that. It's just an assertion.
I agree, Mahdin, and the very fact that it is, if the science is to be believed, if it's true, if it's a fact that 99% of the species living on the planet have already become extinct, that means that there has been so much suffering, and it has been going on. Only if you're going through that numbers, that you seem to see that there's a lot of good going on, that could not have been said probably 3,000 years back, 4,000 years back, or something like that. I mean, you can point to those things as well, pretty much evidentially, not philosophically maybe,
Yes,
but at least
exactly.
that's
I would argue that even humans weren't in such a good condition just a few centuries ago. I think
yeah, exactly, exactly.
humans were living in terrible conditions just a few centuries ago. They had to go through a lot of diseases. A lot of children. I think there was child mortality was rampant in every house. There were, because women, there weren't that many maternal facilities or hospitals where they could be taken care of, children or them and the mother. So there were many deaths, many young deaths, many diseases, non-availability of clean water, clean facilities. I mean, there was so much misery in the world, and I think only few elites were happy, or were comfortable living comfortably. So I
Yeah,
think this problem of suffering, I think, not just minor discomfort, throughout
exactly.
human history, I think most humans were suffering, were not happy, were not living in comfortable conditions. So I think, you could argue that for human, that applies on humans as well.
Right, exactly. What was that? Just a side point. What was that Black Death of 14th
Plague,
century or something like?
plague,
Yeah, the
the
yeah
bubonic plague,
that wiped out like more
Black
than
Death, yeah.
half of the
Exactly.
Yeah, but what I'll also say is that the privation theory in defense of a good God isn't dependent upon a quantifiable case.
yeah yeah.
Or
I'm saying, yeah, privation
yeah, I
theory
know.
is
I would argue that as well.
we
Yeah, we were
already
hypothetically.
we already
Yeah,
we already have
yeah,
a case just mirroring that pretty much, right?
yeah. It's not dependent on a quantifiable case, because even if this world was 90% 99% good and 1% deviated, the privation theory would be saying that that deviation of that 1% is a privation of the good, right? That's what privation theory tries to say. It's not dependent on the quantifiability of it. So even if this world is we don't need to actually prove to these guys that there's more suffering and there's less good. They can let's say hypothetically they prove there's more good, whatever that means, in this world than there is suffering, because the privation theory that theists use is simply saying that whatever deviation from the good is a deviation from the good, even if that's 1%, even if the world is 99% the case of good. Evil happens because it moves away from the natural state, right? Since the privation theory is not dependent upon what's more, I think you can still hold that, whatever the conditions are. So if the conditions were the case that there was 99%, because it's not dependent on that. What it means is that if the conditions of the world was that 99% evil, right, they will still say that 99% is a deviation from the 1% of good. That's what the
but he hasn't given any argument for why you have to believe in privation of evil versus good instead of good versus evil, in a sense that
Yes. And let me just quickly finish up. It means that if it is the case that it's not dependent upon that, then in principle, if the world was the case that it was 99% full of evil, right, they would still be saying that 99% evil is a deviation from that 1%. The default state is good, right? And the rest of it is just a deviation. And technically, Islamically, that's correct as well. The world can become disastrous and horrendous and it'll still be a deviation from good, right? Even if 99% of the humanity and 99% of animal kingdom is full of suffering and horrendous horror and evil, that's a deviation, whatever that is, right? And if that's the case, then it's clearly, it doesn't really matter which one is more, and therefore the evil God proponent can also make that same sort of argument. The default, so whatever it is, if it's 99% or 1%, we can just say it's a deviation from it, from the evil. If evil is 1%, the rest of the 99% is a deviation from it. If evil is 99%, the rest of the 1% is a deviation from it. You see that? You can still mirror the parallel.
But what is their justification? That's the question, right? That's the problem, right? You can believe that privation theory, but at least you need to provide some kind of a don't you think they have to provide some justification for it? I mean,
True.
as we said, we already can mirror it pretty successfully as well, right?
What I'm trying to say is that even if hypothetically it was the quantifiable case that there's more of this, what I'm trying to say is that the Islamic proponent, if you push them, they would say
they have a right to do that. Yeah, agree.
If the Islamic proponent would push them, if they're Islamically sound and following the scripture and so on, they would say, even Islamically, that even if the world was horrendous, hypothetically, if it was total horrendous suffering, that will still be a deviation from the 1%.
Exactly.
They say that,
I agree. Yes.
If they accept that, then they've conceded that it's not about quantity anymore. So they will contradict themselves, and they will have to contradict themselves because, Islamically speaking, I think Islam foreshadows that the world is going to go into total corruption or whatever, or something like that. And Islamically speaking, the privation theory. My point is the privation theory is not dependent upon a quantifiable case.
Right.
Right. Agreed. Yeah, I agree. All right. Shall we move on then?
Yes.
Go further.
Let's go.
All right.
That this evil God that created us is gave us knowledge that is actually that actually does correspond to reality. How do we know that our the mathematical truths that we think we know and logical truths are actually true, as opposed to in the case of a good God where he created us and
Sorry, Kelly, did you want to add something or
move back a bit? I said so that we can hear his complete statement.
the evil God, or I think you're also the dependence and case is privation to basically this evil being's dependence on creation in order to basically manifest any kind of evil. And this is related, of course, to the privation theory of evil. But yeah, so I think as far as like the cumulative case is concerned, it's just much easier to point asymmetries because of things like God's independence and obviously considering the nature of evil, and also the moral argument is a very strong one as well. And I don't know. I think you're. I saw in your notes you're going to talk about the epistemic concern as well, because I think the evil God argument does leave you with some kind of possible radical skepticism. That how do we know that this evil God that created us is gave us knowledge that is actually that actually does correspond to reality? How do we know that our the mathematical truths that we think we know and the logical truths are actually true, as opposed to in the case of a good God where he created us and we would expect the knowledge that we have to be like vertical. So I guess from like an overall angle, it's just for me, I think it's easy to point out certain asymmetries, and Dr. Saf can elaborate on that.
Inshallah.
Can you
so just to kind of, because we mentioned the paradise one.
Yeah, Mahdin, would you want to say something on this?
You go first, since you paused
Because
it.
I think, because what he just mentioned is that he just mentioned that if evil God is possible or evil God exists, then we can no longer rely, or we don't have good reasons to believe or rely on our rational faculties, because an evil God would not give us reliable rational faculties, where our understanding actually is in line with what you call it, corresponds to reality. So
Reality.
then I think it's the same argument. We've discussed this earlier as well. Even from a good God perspective, if you believe in the mystical theism, that's a term, right? I might be skeptical theism.
Skeptical
Right.
theism. Skeptical theism.
So yeah, if you go to the skeptical theism route, and most theists do, and I think it's sort of an inevitable route that they have to take, then there is a good God can have good reasons to give us unreliable rational faculties. He could have unlimited reasons for doing so. So until and unless you prove that no, a good God cannot have any good reasons to give us unreliable rational faculties, then I think only then you could use it. But even a theist would believe or would realize that there are people or humans in this world who lack this ability to have or who lack this reliable rational faculties, people who are mentally unsound. And if they believe in the existence of such people, of course they can witness them, then that means that God had a good reason to create such people. Maybe he could create many such humans. If you can explain away the existence of such humans who lack this level of intellect where they can actually understand reality, then you could apply similar logic uh, to all other humans, or maybe majority of other humans. So this argument falls on his head right away. Doesn't prove anything, I think.
Before Mahdin jumps in, Kelly, we're still getting that rustling sound from your side.
Oh, okay. Let
It's
me do something about.
yeah. I think it's maybe yeah. I don't know. You just take care of it because it's a little bit disturbing. I don't know, Mahdin, you feel the same, but if the audio improves, that's going to be much better. Yeah, Mahdin, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think what it shows is the strength of the skeptical theism parody. It can be deployed in any context to quarrel with any sort of asymmetry that they try to present, right? So this is why I think Stephen Law's argument doesn't need to rely on trying to mirroring every parody for parody's sake. The whole point is, can you make a good case for a moral God more so than a evil God? And the point is, if there's just one thing that, like the skeptical theism card that theists can present, which can tackle many things at once, then evil God proponents can deploy a similar skeptical theism card. for an evil God that tackles many things at once. And in this situation where this guy's saying that you won't create, creatures with reliable faculties, well, there might be a mysterious reason, and that would silence all criticism, because that's what ultimately they say, right? There might be a mysterious reason that we don't know. I mean, if an evil God had a mysterious reason, we won't know about it beyond our ken. That's all that's required. That, in fact, that one defense can destroy every single, in my view, asymmetry that they try to present. Yeah, as long as that exists. So reality is that unless you're a theist who finds that card to be weak, yeah. So if you're a type of theist who finds that card to be really weak, a skeptical theism defense, then you can possibly point out these asymmetries. Otherwise, you can't, I think. But just going further down that, I mean, like Kylie said, the idea that an evil God won't, what this guy's saying, the evil God won't create people with mathematical, logical thinking. I see no reason why, right? Because, you need comprehension and understanding and planning and determine, ability to determine things, to suffer in particular ways, right? So the fact that we have numerical skills and literacy skills or something, or we can, we have the laws of logic, I don't see why that's incompatible with an evil God, right? Because it brings evil to a more visceral reality, right? If you are a snake with limited senses, then you're not seeing all of the evil in the world, maybe, right?
You're not suffering as much, probably, as well.
Possibly, yeah, exactly.
Arguable. As well.
Yeah, it's arguable, right?
Yeah.
But so the fact that you have visceral and capabilities and ability to understand mathematics and logic is not, like what the blue guy may say, it's not a significant of a point, because it is still compatible with an evil God, right? But he's trying to the Abdul Rahman guy is trying to boast of the fact that these things are good, these things require specific planning, to give logical rules, to give mathematical rules or something like that, assuming that God gave us these things, and so on, and helps us organize lives. This is a good thing, right? But all the evil God proponent has to say is that that's what theists say to theists would say to a quintessential example of gratuitous suffering. So the Abdul Rahman guy is trying to say this is a quintessential example of something good, mathematical rules. Well, what is a quintessential example of suffering? It'll be just like defective organs or mental retardation, disabilities, or something like that, and that apparently has a greater good behind it, etc. Again, the skeptical theist defense or something like that, right? So if you can say to quintessential forms of suffering, gratuitous suffering, without any explanation, which looks like something that a good God won't do, a good God. So just like he's saying, Abdul Rahman is saying, an evil God won't create laws of mathematics. I can say a good God won't create human disabilities. A good God won't create all this happiness and all this all this disorganized. Sorry, a good God won't create all this unhappiness. Good God won't create all these defects in organs. A good God, but he has an explanation behind that. The defect has a greater good or something. Well, the laws of mathematics and laws of logic, which look like good design, let's say good design, has a evil purpose behind it. There you go. You can draw the parallel like that. So I don't see why that's persuasive in that sense.
Right. I think that's those all things can be mirrored in a sense, pretty much. Right. Kelly, you want to add something to it? Shall we move on? Kelly, are you there?
Yeah. I think we can move on.
Yeah, before we move on, these guys may appeal to the fact that there is more organization than disorganization. Again, the quantifiable thing, right? And what I want to say is that most theologians, when pressed, so when people deploy stuff like skeptical theism or greater good arguments, they admit, even William Lane Craig has, and I'm sure the Islamic proponents would admit that those arguments go through, even in the case if the entire world was full of total suffering, right? There was no good. So it's not really dependent upon quantifiability, right? It's not the case that there is more organization than disorganization. So if Abdul Rahman is trying to say there's more organization than disorganization, that leans towards a good God versus an evil God, right? Unless, again, he has to therefore, we need to know what Abdul Rahman's idea of skeptical theism is. He might be a type of guy who doesn't believe in skeptical theism. Then we're going to have a more sophisticated discussion about this. But I don't see what he can do to explain, though, stuff like gratuitous torture of an animal in the bushes, gratuitous rape, sorry for saying that word, grape.
No matter how you try to avoid that that word, I couldn't hold myself back as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So total gratuitous suffering without no explanation. How else is he going to explain it? He has to explain it by saying something like it has to happen for a greater good. I don't see what else he can appeal to. He has to. Yeah, which means it's inescapable that he has to have some sort of skeptical theism type of leaning. I can't see how else he can explain that with a good God. But if that's the case, then he's already bitten that bullet, and he accepts the idea that if there is gratuitous suffering, then there might be some beyond your ken reasons, redemption argument, or compensation argument in heaven, or the fact that it leads to some greater good in this life. You know, the person got killed, butchered, so that his parents get better in the future, or something like that. Parents become more heroic, or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights would have been written, or something like that. But if he's appealing to stuff like that, then he's already conceded that that there could be beyond your ken greater goods, and therefore there could be beyond your ken greater evils as well for any sort of point that he makes. And when he accepts that point, most theologians, when pressed to say, what if the world was full of just gratuitous? Wouldn't that be an asymmetry? You know, if it was just full of gratuitous suffering, then it points towards an evil God. And the people was, no, there could still be a beyond your ken reason. If this world was full of suffering, and most Islamic theologians have accepted this as well. I listen to philosophical papers, people with philosophical training. Yeah, ultimately they admit themselves, they have to bite the bullet and say, yes, even if the world was full of total net suffering, there was not one instance of good, we can still never conclude that there isn't any beyond your ken reason, a skeptical theistic reason that would salvage a good God. A good God can still be behind it. Yeah, which means if Abdul Rahman is making a case from a quantifiable, from quantities, from the fact that there's a lot more design, a lot more good things or something, it doesn't really matter, because he would still say, if it was total suffering, that there's a good God. Well, therefore quantity doesn't matter, and therefore, even if there's a mixed situation where there's more good. So let me rephrase that. Even if the whole world was full of good, the evil God argument goes through. There's the symmetry. There's so he needs to still have the symmetry breaker. Even if the world was full of all good things, there could still be an evil God behind it, because he's already accepted by skeptical theism that if the world was full of all suffering, that there could still be a good God. So the quantifiable case doesn't matter again.
Yeah, it just doesn't pass through. Yeah, agreed.
I think the only rescue for Abdul Rahman would be to reject that. He would have to say something like, he didn't accept that. He would say that that there is an evil God, He would say, yeah, if let's say the Kalam cosmological argument was true, that God has to be evil if the world was full of horrendous suffering. But can he say that? Is that Islamically sound? I don't know.
I don't. I don't think so. Maybe so because you sort of hinted towards the fact that even according to Islamic theology, the Islamic understanding, near the end of the world, there will be a lot of chaotic events that will happen. And I would say in a way that there will be a lot more suffering than there will be good. So I think in a way, and I'm talking about this world, right? We're not talking about the afterlife. We're talking about just before the afterlife, the events of afterlife start. So you could argue that at that point, the humans who are living at that point, from their perspective, they could see that, okay, this world is full of terrible things. That is full of evil. Now can I argue that the God is evil? Well, no. The theologian would say, no, we do know that this was going to happen, and therefore, and we know that there are good reasons that God have for this. So if they can explain that away, then I think they should believe that if this happens any time in history. So, for example, there are many Muslims who believe that during the time of Noah, the entire earth was flooded. Although in modern times this narrative has changed, Christians still do believe that the entire earth was flooded, but a lot of Muslims have now ended up or have started to believe that this was a localized flood, not the entire um, land. But if you look at it from their perspective, if you look at it from their perspective, from the perspective of a person who lives in a city, let's say a few hundred years ago, he's not even aware of how people are living in other lands. So according to him, if something happens to him locally, for him, if something terrible happens in his locality, all he knows, this is his world. This is how everywhere. This is what happens to everyone. And so for him, he could, from his perspective, he could say, well, this earth seems to be filled with the entire, seems to be filled with a lot of evil. So is a Muslim going to agree then that, okay, no, and yeah, I mean that in that case, yes, he is justified in that belief, that yes, from his perspective, since his entire world, which is localized, of course, it's let's say a city or even his country, based on that, can he argue that, okay, this is full of evil, and therefore I should now declare that God is evil? I don't think they would still agree with that, because you could always argue, even if the entire earth is full of evil, you could argue, well, there could be other earths. I'm just going, just telling you the sort of argument that they could come up with. So I think that they will have to agree that no, they have to uh, you know say that no, even if the earth was full of evil, even then God would be good, because God can have good reasons for it.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
All right.
Okay, yeah, so
Let's
let's
move
move
on
on.
then. Yeah.
And if we go into that, I think it makes quite a clear asymmetry pretty easily. Like, so for example, you would say, well, there is a good reason why a good God would create a hellfire. That is because of this concept of justice. Evil people should go to the hellfire. And when you flip that and you talk about the evil God, it's like, well, why would he create the paradise? Because injustice is important, and therefore you should send good people to paradise. So this, uh, although there be a coherence with
I think Yusuf is breaking up, or is that just me?
Oh right, yeah, I think Yusuf is breaking up.
Yusuf, you're breaking up a bit.
Yeah, it's breaking up.
Okay,
for me as
where
well.
did
But I don't think when they argue for an evil being, they don't believe that there is paradise, do they? They don't really posit that. They just say that you live an evil life, and then you go to hellfire, and then you have eternity of evil.
But then
There is no paradise. They don't posit that.
One of the tricky
what we
things
say.
with this challenge is, of course, from the side of the proponents. So let's just take, if you want to take Stephen Law as the Dr. Stephen Law's sort of formulation. Some of it has to be fleshed out, because one of the issues with this argument, of course, as we'll see, the theistic side is fleshed out because you've got data from, natural theology, from Revelation, that tells you, that informs you the kind of being and character this God is, this creator is, whether it's from the Quran Kareem or whatever other religious scriptures. So that on the theist side is filled out. But on the evil God side, I know, they have identical attributes, absolute power and knowledge, except for benevolence, have malevolence. But then, certain axioms have to be delineated, because if they don't, then, weaknesses show, and then those weaknesses can be exploited to then, undermine the argument. And I think that's where the maneuvers can be made. You can see, exploit the ambiguity as well, or the lack of information on that side.
Yeah, Jake's been a bit quiet. That
Can
always
you
worries
pause
me.
it?
No, I'm just listening.
So yeah, this now Saf is saying that through revelation, we know the kind of moral character that God has, and we don't have anything similar for an evil God. So he's saying that according to revelation, that we have God is good, and we don't have anything similar for the evil side. So sorry, I'll have to bring some water. You guys continue.
I think this begs the question, right? I mean, if you have already started believing into these, I'm just trying to continue the point that Kelly made, basically, right? And their point is that because since atheists don't have such kind of a scripture, they can't claim that the claims that theists can make, that the God is moral, basically, or is good, basically. But it's begging the question: how do you reach to that point that you believe that that certain book is from um, a certain God, basically, and good God? I think that's a kind of a circularity problem, basically, right? Because that's the point at least you're trying to get into, basically. Of course, here they're trying to defend the evil God, or at least refute the evil God hypothesis, and so they can't claim that they can probably claim. Mahdin, what do you think? Can they, in this case, claim that because we have a revelation, we have the right to believe in that God, or do they fall into the circularity problem? I think they do fall into the circularity problem. I mean,
Kind of. The idea is that we don't have a similar evil God sending a scripture or something like that, and they've got a God. So a good God sends a scripture, but we don't have something similar. In the sense that if there is an evil God, what can we reconcile it with the scripture? The fact that there's a scripture. One, that's kind of the first point that this man said. The second point is that it doesn't make sense to have heaven and hell for an evil God, but it makes sense to have heaven and hell for a good God. Right?
I mean,
At that point, I
he
think
said,
Yeah.
already Sharif refuted it. I think he was, and I think it seems to be refuted, right?
Yeah. So if Stephen Law was making the point that heaven and hell can be symmetrically mapped with an evil God, then that man's point, the top left corner, I can never know these names. So top left corner, he would be right to refute him on that point, that it can't be mirrored effectively. Maybe, I think, possibly. I'll think about that in a minute, a bit more.
yeah,
But Stephen Law is limiting it to the existing world data, right? And insofar the existing world data we have for heaven and hell, it comes from the scripture. So the question is then, it falls on the, I think, technically on the scripture. Can we have a parallel argument to explain scripture? Would an evil God send a scripture where they talk about heaven and hell in the future? For the, isn't this more like evidence for a good God? I think that's the best way to steel my argument. So the scripture is better evidence of a good God, because an evil God wouldn't come out with heaven and hell. What do you think about that? Before I take up my
I don't know. I won't.
yeah, I don't
I
think
won't
so. I mean, that
actually.
seems like
I
on
won't even
a
have
prima
to.
facie, it looks a
Yeah.
little compelling, to be honest. But I mean, why can't you claim that the same scripture is coming from an evil God, and then
Yeah.
the
And he's
concept of
lying
a
to you.
heaven, yeah, he's lying to you.
And
I
he's
mean,
lying to you.
the
There
concept
is
of
no
heaven
paradise.
is there for just a luring effect, maybe, and
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
it's an evil god. He's giving
Maybe
you
to,
a bait
yeah.
to basically, lure into it. But there's just a, it's just a
So
lie that there is a heaven kind of a thing.
And even any, again, a sadistic view could be, that he is luring you into, or he is compelling, in a way trying to convince you that if you do all these things, if you make yourself, if you suppress your desires and don't do a lot of these things that I'm telling you, I'll give you all these good things, and in the end he'll laugh at you and say, okay, it was just a joke, I'm not giving you anything at all. So in a way, that he could cause you suffering that way as well. So there is no way for you to rely on that revelation. You have no way to actually be
yeah.
reliably to
So
rely on that revelation.
what you and Philo's responses show is that the parodies don't have to be the parodies, or we don't have to draw a complete symmetrical
Exactly.
parallel.
And we've already
Where
mentioned that.
yeah. So what we can exactly, so we can just take certain things that theists say, even in other areas, like again, this is when you say that it could be for a deceptive reason. Again, that's skeptical theism again, which is that there may be a reason beyond your ken, or and in this case, the reason is that there's a mystery, there's a mysterious reason why the
No,
evil
but
god sent.
sorry,
Yeah, go
more
on.
than just to cut you off over here. If we are giving a reason, then it's no longer skeptical theism, right? We have given you a reason.
Yeah.
If I give you a
I mean,
single reason which you cannot refute, then I think it's fair enough. This is no longer skeptical theism.
yeah, I agree. What I'm trying to say is that it's similar to skeptical theism in the sense that there might be a mysterious reason that you don't know, right? That alone standalone works, right? But in addition to that, there could be a reason which is deception, like you said, right? Does that fall within the sphere of skeptical theism? Probably not, because the whole point of skeptical theism is that there might be a reason that you don't know. That's consistent with his justice, right? And you can say that there is a deceptive reason that is consistent with its evil. So you can still build it into skeptical theism, but yeah, it can operate independently as well. You can just say that there is a reason, as you said, and there's a deceptive reason, because he wants to deceive you. He wants to just plainly deceive you, because that's what evil people do. evil persons do. An all evil person may want to give you a revelation or lots of revelations with holes in them, fragmented over time,
confuse you.
and so on. So it's still consistent. Yeah, exactly. So my point is, so all of our arguments, all of our objections, they show that there's a multi-faceted ways of reconciling it with an evil God, and it doesn't have to exactly parallel it. So if what these guys are showing then in these objections is that Stephen Law may be wrong to say that you can think of an exact parallel. I don't think he says that, but if anybody interprets him to think that, then he's possibly wrong. But if you look at his Steelman argument, that is, that we charitably read his arguments, it's just the idea that we can think of reasons that an evil god may do and there may not be a parallel reason that we can find in the sphere of theism that exactly mirrors it, but it's consistent with an evil god, and that's all that matters in the end.
Exactly. Yeah, I think. All right, move on. Or what do you guys think? Shall we pause the review over here? We are hitting about 1 hour 45-minute mark. Maybe
Yes, we might need to, and we probably should. I think it's, and
right.
probably we don't have many viewers right now, so I think let's continue the next time.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
continue this.
Right.
What do you think, Mahdin? Shall we?
I think so too. Let me just say one more thing before we do turn off. I mean,
Sure.
this,
Go ahead.
this is more like a conjecture on my part. I'm still developing the thought. It's just a thought that came to my mind. Maybe you can say something for why heaven and hell exist. For let's say, would an evil God create an heaven and hell? And theists, for example, have to deal with this as well. theists get told, for example, why would a good God create people and then make them go to hell? It doesn't make sense that a good God would punish people with an infinite punishment for a finite crime, or punish people for little small trivial mistakes, and then they go into the hellfire. That's not reconcilable. That is not reconcilable with an all good, omnipotent, omnibenevolent God. But if that's the case, and yet theists still accept that hellfire is consistent with an omnibenevolent God, then maybe, again, this is a speculative argument on my part, it might be wrong, it might be right. I need to think about it more. It may be the case that an evil God will also create a heaven, right? Where he sends people to an afterlife forever. But then you would say, wait a minute, why would an evil God, wouldn't an evil God just send everybody to hell? All evil God? But then, wait, theists say the same thing. Wouldn't a good God, theists are confronted with the same reality when atheists say, wouldn't a good God create people, in order to get around the problem of evil, we say, wouldn't our good God just skip this life and send everybody to heaven? But no, we have this unpersuasive reasons given by theists saying that they have to go to hell, or they have to suffer here, or yes, you have to be punished for a finite crime forever, infinitely, eternally. Even though that seems unjust, they still think it's reconcilable with an all good God. Well, then, however weak it sounds, maybe it's reconcilable with an all evil God, even though it sounds extremely just. It sounds extremely just for an evil God to send people to heaven, right? But if you're accepting it for an all good God, then maybe hell for an all good God, maybe you should accept heaven for an all evil God. That's something to think about.
I think that's really something to think about. Although I think
Yeah.
they could say, although you have raised a very good point about that they have a similar problem to respond to, which is why does God actually create an eternal hell if He's an all-loving God? uh, and we can have a similar argument on our side, or not our side, or a person who posits an evil God. And I think this sounds good, but I think one argument that they make is that this is and Yusuf actually points that out. Actually, he says that we say that God created hell because he values justice. And he says, well, if on the evil side, is it the case that he values injustice a lot, and injustice has to be there and all of that? And is that why is that it's necessary? So I'm not sure if we have if it works on the other side then for
Yeah,
injustice.
it's
So
not completely parallel. I agree.
yeah, it's not completely parallel. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
it's
yeah, I mean, yeah,
when we
it's
unpack
something to think about.
it's when we unpack the idea whether that's true justice, right? He values justice, but we're not persuaded by the fact that eternal hellfire is justice for the specific type of crimes. And if we're not persuaded by
Yeah,
that, then it falls apart, I think. Then we can
yeah,
say, this is not the type of justice that we would expect on a benevolent God. But they will still just hold on to it. But if that's the case, at that point, then maybe an eternal heaven is not the type of justice that we'd expect. Yeah,
yeah.
not the type of reward we would expect on an evil God, but we can just hold on to it.
Yeah.
So there's
Or maybe
something. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, or
Mm.
maybe an evil god does actually value people who actually cause a lot of suffering, let's say. And he says that, okay, I'm going to actually enable you to even cause more maybe the kind of sadistic or evil god.
Mm.
um, what he could do is maybe he says that, okay, all the people who will commit the most atrocious deeds in this world will be made um to cause a lot more torture to others uh, to those people, right? So maybe for them that will be heaven, right? Because they'll
Yeah,
be allowed
that
to
will be their
commit a lot
suffering.
more torture. Yeah. So for
That will be
them,
their suffering. Yeah.
I mean, for them, for people who likes to torture others, to act, to commit evil acts, for them it will be heaven if they're allowed to do similar deeds over there, right? So maybe they will be the ones who will actually be managing managing hell. So in a way,
Yeah, yeah,
that could
yeah.
be for
I
their
think I
heaven.
mean then we have flipped the definitions basically
Yeah,
of
yeah,
heaven
it's slightly
as
different. It's a slightly different view because in
the
this world,
definitions. Yeah, we have
yeah,
flipped
yeah,
things.
exactly. It's in this world, everyone is not suffering,
Right.
there is some sort of acts that the god is valuing more than others. So it's a different view, but I'm saying that maybe this could be the view. It's not something. It's not something impossible or completely refutable. You cannot say that it's impossible. So it's
Mm.
just one way of looking at it, maybe.
Yeah. Especially when you hold on to the idea that there's an all good God. When you
Yeah,
hold on to the idea there's an all good God, then the infinite hellfire concept of justice does seem a bit shaky, right? Especially when he didn't have to do that. And that
right,
way you can think about the concept of an all evil God. The infinite heaven seems a bit shaky because he didn't have to do that. He can just,
right,
wouldn't an evil God just throw everybody in hellfire? Well,
right,
wouldn't a
Exactly.
good God send everyone to heaven? See, the
right.
parallel can still be made. And so when he starts talking about justice and stuff, I think if we push on hard enough, I think he still can make a case. Yeah, I mean, the point is, this is how Christian and Islamic theology has evolved by creating these sort of weak type of cases anyway, right? And now it's part of the tradition to explain justice as being one that is synonymous with hellfire. Yeah, and we just accept it. But that's because we just came to
Mm.
accept it through the history of theology. Had
Yeah,
it
and
been
we
the
have
case,
grown up with these. We have grown up
yeah,
with these explanations. Yeah,
They have come up with Theodicies, and then they have stolen. The Christians have stolen from probably Muslims, and Muslims have stolen from Christians.
yeah,
These kind of exchanges of Theodicies have happened in the past, probably,
yeah,
and now they have this kind of a mature, not mature, but in a
yeah.
sense, you could say they.
I bet you, if these theists were trying to defend an evil god, they would somehow make that sort of argument as well, right? That it makes
yeah,
yeah, that it makes sense
yeah,
that an
yeah.
Yeah,
evil,
that's totally. I mean, yeah,
evil god would send people to heaven because it just is the case that he wants to. Maybe he's rewarding all the evildoers there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Even
and
we could. Yeah, yeah.
hmm.
Sorry, you want to complete it?
Yeah, maybe he's going to reward all the evildoers with a prize, etc.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, because if they can somehow justify even even if God is just, let's say, there's another question that I think, and you've mentioned it in this stream as well, is that why would God create people who would end up in hell then? That is not necessary in God. Let's say God needs to be just, that is in his nature. But then why is it necessary for him to create people who will end up in hell? That is not necessary at all. But yet they're somehow able to. I'm not even sure. I've not even heard of a good theodicy for that. I think that is one of that is one of very. Uh, those are one of the problems that I've not heard even plausible solution. Right? They just say, well, that is something that God has because it's done. You know, that is how it is. I've not. Have you heard of any good explanation or theodicy for this? That why would a just God and an all-loving God why would he even create souls who would end up in eternal hell? He doesn't need to. He can create only those souls which would end up in eternal heaven. So the very fact that he did create them and yet he's all loving, I think is deeply problematic. And if they're able to somehow explain that away, I think we can find similar explanations for even for an evil God then.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, true that. I think.
By the way, have you
That,
guys heard of any? Have you guys heard of any good explanation for this particular problem? I'm not even. I mean, I've not even heard of any plausible, reasonable. I would say. I mean, skeptical theism, for example, you could say, okay, this is some sort of an argument. It's a problematic argument. It's a problematic solution, and there are problems that come up with it. But I think for this particular question that I just mentioned, I don't think they have anything. They just say again they would lead to skeptical theism maybe that they will be we might have some good reasons we don't know, but again it's not, it's nothing at all. I have never heard any good explanation. And I think someone even asked a similar question to specifically to even Abdur Rahman, this guy. I was listening to one of the Thought Adventure podcast a while back, and Abdur Rahman actually he responded to it in a very uh, I would say in a very weak manner. In fact, he did not respond to it. He said that, I'm fed up of all these questions as to why God would create eternal hell. We have already dealt with it. Why are these people coming up with all these questions? We have already dealt with
And
these questions.
in their
But
eyes,
this is not the same question. But this is
yeah,
not
they
the
tag
question
it
that
as
we have dealt
they,
with.
they, they tag these kind of questions as weak questions, basically,
Exactly,
but they
as weak
don't have
questions.
any
These are
answer
not
for it,
weak.
basically, to be honest.
Yeah,
Yeah,
these are not weak. These are very, very strong
strong
objections. We have to
objection.
respond to
Yeah,
that. But I don't
yeah.
think they've responded to it. Maybe I've
I
missed
think
it, but I don't think.
their theology is still, I mean, their theodicies is still under development. You know, that
Yeah,
that sign, under construction sign.
yeah. I think this is one of the
Probably,
problems that they have not been able to find
yeah,
any
yeah.
good solution for.
Maybe,
They just say, okay,
give them
we
another
trust
100,
God.
200 years. Yeah,
Yeah, they just trust in God.
yeah.
In God we trust. So yeah, that is
Right.
what they're doing in this respect.
True, true.
And you can
Okay.
similarly say, in evil God we trust, why there's heaven. Evil
Exactly.
it just
Yeah.
is base. Just shut
Right.
up. Stop thinking about it. It just is.
Exactly. Stop thinking about it. It just is. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I was just looking at, I I would the next part. I think it's we're not close to that right now because it's a bit long discussion. But soon in the stream, Jake, the Muslim metaphysician, would start actually refuting these arguments that the other Muslim guys are presenting. The other guys, Abdur Rahman and Yusuf, and even Saif Chaudhry is going to present or have already
Right.
presented. Jake is going to actually respond to them in a very fair manner, and I think that's very good for honest of him to actually point out the problems that all these o- solutions that Abdur Rahman and Saif Chaudhry are trying to give. Jake very fairly actually refutes them. People can
Okay.
actually listen to this stream,
I think
and I think they'll find this. Yeah,
he's pursuing his masters in philosophy. I think something like that.
yeah, maybe.
Do all of them have degrees in philosophy,
I
or
have no idea. Maybe but some of them, I
I
think,
I've heard
because
of Yusuf Ponders. He has a bachelor's in probably philosophy or something like that.
yeah,
I know
Philosophy of
the
religion, maybe.
Chaudhry guy, the blue guy, has some
The
sort
blue.
of is some sort of lecturer or something, or no? Yeah.
Okay,
hmm
okay.
hmm
So they all are in academia, probably.
they are,
Probably.
and they are all well versed in philosophy, I would say. I think they're a good bunch, generally speaking. They are generally nice, a nicer bunch of people.
I think, yeah. I mean, if
Yeah,
they're tackling these problems, then they have a certain understanding of these
yeah,
problems,
yeah.
at least philosophically speaking, in a sense. Yeah.
Mm.
But I think
So
on
yeah,
I mean,
I know the one
I,
on the top right. I think Sharif. I've spoken to him maybe in the
Sharif.
past.
Mm,
Yeah, I know.
mm,
I know. Undergirding everything though is faith. At least for him, I know that.
mhm.
He is approaching philosophy as a toolkit, to then rationalize his beliefs.
Right.
I
That's
think
the
for most, I mean, I can't say for sure, but for most of them, their undergirding probably foundation is the faith. Probably, I think, even for these discussions. Would I be wrong in saying that? Maybe I don't know.
I don't know
But
about the rest. But,
yeah,
I suspect it's very difficult to wrestle with these arguments without some sort of mental gymnastics that comes from
I
feelings.
mean,
Yeah, that feelings undergird
yeah.
it. Yeah, yeah.
I think even because so if you listen to Jake, the Muslim metaphysician's lectures and videos, I think he is very well versed. I'm using the word well versed as to, as in he has read a lot. He knows a lot more jargons. I think um, he understands a lot of these concepts. Of course, he knows a lot more than me, but I still, of course, find a lot of flaws in his argumentation. So I'm not sure how these guys are able to rationalize a lot of these things that they believe in, and why don't they see the problems that
the
is there in
flaws
their
or
philosophy?
faults in their own.
Yeah,
Yeah, I see.
exactly,
I mean,
exactly. Somehow
I just
somehow
sorry. Go
they're
ahead.
able to ignore them. Somehow they're able to rationalize their belief. you know, Jake has in fact Jake is a had a debate with the Christian. He's a
Jadar.
Jadar,
Jadar.
and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, as I mentioned. So his view of God is he belongs to the Salafi sect who believes in uh, God having two hands. Of course, he say that we don't know the kafia as in the state or the what does it actually mean
Exactly.
that God has two hands, but he says that we affirm that he has two hands.
Two
He has
hands, a
one chin,
shin,
he has one
a
foot, yeah,
face, 1 foot.
a face,
Yeah,
yeah, a face and a forehead, all these things.
forehead
So
and all
he
these
says
things.
that
Yeah.
we affirm that all of that, and I cannot,
We don't know the
I
kafia,
cannot. He
basically.
doesn't
Yeah,
even,
we don't know the
yeah, yeah,
kafia,
he doesn't
basically.
even say that these are metaphoric. He doesn't take them metaphorically, because a lot of other sects do consider these metaphoric, but he says
Yeah,
no. So somehow he's able to, somehow and he is also a very staunch critique of Christianity and Trinity. So somehow
exactly. I mean, how can you criticize that once you have these kind of, yeah, I don't know, just baffles me, to be honest. Khali, I think we
I
lost
think I was
your mic.
did I disappear?
Yeah, yeah. Just 5 seconds. Go back 5 seconds, 5, 10 seconds. Khali?
Anyway,
Yeah.
anyway, I'm just. Do we want to end here and continue tomorrow, another day?
Yeah, yeah. Let's end here. Khali, can you hear us? Are you okay? Okay. I think we lost Khali. I hope Khali you haven't fallen down from the rooftop. Just kidding. Just a bad joke. So all right, everybody, whoever is listening so far, that is zero people listening as of now. But what I want to say, and since this is a new channel, that is to be expected. This channel, this new English only channel, is surely gonna. Okay, Kelly's back. Kelly, I wanted to go through the, uh, last minute closing statements. So unless until you have something to add to.
No, no, I've added a lot. I've said a lot already. So yeah, you guys go ahead now.
All right, all right. So what I was saying to the audience is that this is a new. I'm pretty sure there are gonna be folks who are gonna later on listen to this stream. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this clip, probably upload it as a whole on our main channel, that is Philo Sapiens, and or maybe we can just make clips out of it and then upload those. That remains to be seen. Irrespective, anybody who's listening to this, please do like, subscribe, and just share this channel. This is, as I've said in the beginning as well, this is gonna be a philosophy heavy channel, and uh, we're gonna tackle problems like these basically. And what we're gonna do is it's only gonna be English only channel. So any audience who's listening to us from West, that is especially US, UK, or maybe even Australia or South Africa and all the other English speaking countries, that doesn't have to limit people who can understand these philosophical ideas from India or Asia or any other country basically. But yeah, please do like, subscribe, and share. And thank you both, Mahdin, Kelly. Do you want to add something before we shut down the
No,
stream?
no, no. I think no, no. I've got nothing to add.
All right. All right. Thank you guys very much. See you next time. Bye bye.
Bye bye.